Hi everybody, I'm Joey. Well, you can probably tell I'm just about finished these pair of tool boys. This is made from New Zealand Rimu, and it's old growth Rimu. So those of you who don't know, it's very hard to get old growth Rimu. It's illegal to fell it. So this has been sitting around since about the 50s under my client's house. He had a few really nice boards, just enough to make these two. And so it's really nice timber. It's a bit of a treat to use really nice old clean timber like this. And it's the first time I've used such nice quality Rimu. So like I say, I'm just about finished. Stick with me through the video. We see how I got to this point, and then I've just got to do a final clear coat and put the handles on. So some of these boards were very large. I couldn't actually get them in my van, so I had to cut them to what I thought or hoped would be the right length on site, and then bring them into the workshop and start ripping them in half. And this was actually reasonably easy. I just kept track of all the pieces so I could carry on and book match them later on. Even though I don't think I ended up using this board, I could see straight away that the grain in this was going to be awesome. Some of the figure and the different color variances. So I was really looking forward to seeing what else was in the stack. And like, look at this, some really beautiful clean boards, which is exactly what I wanted. It's pretty common for this kind of timber to be eaten by beetles. So probably the most important part of this whole job is just laying everything out and working out if I had enough timber to make all the pieces. And yeah, there was just enough. There's maybe one board left over, which is a little bit ropey anyway, so I really only have one chance at everything. So yeah, got everything through the planer and started to really see what I was dealing with. The client really wanted quite deep draws, as deep as I could get. This plank is 300mm, but because of these few beetle holes that had found its way in, we ended up having to reduce the draw depth to 260mm, which is still very big, but you know, it's annoying that we had to change everything just because of that one board, but that's what we had to do. So I could get on with joining the sides of the unit, which is pretty straightforward. Rip a straight edge and then parallel on the saw, and I can glue that together straight off the saw. It's a very nice cut. I added some dominoes to help align with alignment. Some of these boards were still a little bit twisty. Plenty of glue, and into the clamps they went. The next day I took everything out of the clamps and put the large panels, side panels, through the sander, mainly just to bring everything down to an equal thickness. Then I could trim everything to length and start thinking about the joinery. Now, the base of this is going to have some quick and dirty half-blind dovetails to hold the sides to the bottom panel. So first thing was to add a rebate to the ends of the bottom panel, and scribing a few lines on the bottom of the sides. So I'm really not worried about what these dovetails look like, so I'm just using my dovetail guide as the spacer, and whatever's at the ends is whatever's there. So this is how I would generally take out all the waste for with the dovetails. In this case it's a bit tricky because one, the Rimu is very hard, or pretty hard, and two, the grain is all over the place. You can see there it's just not breaking out very nicely at all, so I had to keep going back, making sure I had a sharp chisel so I can actually slice through this without tearing too much of it out. with the tails cut, I can clamp the carcass together, or the bottom of it anyway, and mark out where the pins or sockets will be. I deliberately left the dovetail thickness 15mm thick when I cut the rebate on the bottoms. That meant that I can cut the waste away on the pin side with one pass, which is the maximum pass I can make with my down cut bit. That means I didn't have to reset the depth a bunch of times and go over and over. Just speeds things up. So I would cut very close to the line with the router and just trim away the corners by hand. And yeah, even like I said before, it's really rough and ready, so any gaps that are there, I don't care. It's never going to be seen. It's just literally holding the thing together. I did the same kind of thing at the top, where the top rail will extend across to the other side. Exact same thing with a rebated dovetail, and cut out with the router and cleaned up by hand. With the main carcass dry fitted, I could start ripping up all the pieces I need for the drawer frames that go inside the carcass, and a few dominoes to glue these together. Now I'm actually making a mistake at this point. I'm making the frames about 40mm too wide, so there is just enough timber left for me to cut them down later on, but it would have been nice to know at this stage. And the next day these can all get flattened out through the drum sander as well. Now that I know the final thickness of those drawer frames, I can run my dado blade across all the side panels to allow them to fit in. Some quick sharpening and on to smoothing out the side panels. Now I fitted the top rails while everything was gluing up, but they are dry at this point. I still want to remove them. I think I still want to remove them at this point. With the carcass glue ups dry, I could flip them upside down and just smooth the join so that when the plinth goes on, it will sit nice and flat. Now that I knew what width the drawer frames had to be, I could actually cut them down, and I could here allow for dovetail at the front. So that's what I'm doing, cutting the waste off. Now I've only just cut that domino off, so 90% of the domino is still in the join. The drawer frame will mostly sit in the dados in the side panels, but at the front there will be a small sliding dovetail that is going to hold the front right in the right place, so it's not going to want to move and make the drawers too sloppy. So this is a very easy way to create that dovetail. Something to think about is to create the length of the dovetail at about the length or width of your chisel. In this case I'm using a 30mm chisel, so my dovetail is about 25 or 28mm long. As it turned out, my dado stack couldn't quite cut what I needed to, so I had to do 2 passes with my little plane and a little bit of chiseling to make the drawer frame sit in the dados. But that was all good and it fitted very nicely. So with those fitted, I can then mark around the dovetail so I can cut the waste away there. So it was time to settle down for the better part of the day to cut tiny little fiddly dovetails. There's a little bit of fiddling and trimming and all sorts of the usual things to try and get this to fit, but in the end they worked out pretty nicely. Tight as they were though, some of them I didn't even need glue, they were a bit tight. You get to a point when you're fitting them where you've put them in far enough that you can't take them back out again, so sometimes they don't get any glue. So some of them were a little gappy, so I added some basic sawdust and glue to any little defects I could see at this point, and on with flattening and smoothing out the fronts. I could then get on to making the base plinth, so I'd already milled up a few pieces of timber and was adding a small basic profile to the front edge, and on the back of that added a rebate, which is where the main carcass will sit onto. With all the pieces cut to length and mited and everything, I could draw out some basic shapes for the what would become the feet. So with the plinths drying up, I could work on the middle divider for the top drawer. So behind this Rimu front vertical piece, I used a piece of quarter sawn Victorian ash, which is the secondary timber in most of this build. All of the drawer bodies will be made out of this timber, and I'm using it primarily because I can buy it quarter sawn right off the rack, and it's pretty inexpensive and easy to work, and it looks pretty nice too. I'd been wondering for a while how I was going to actually attach the plinth. In the end, it's just a couple of blobs of glue. It was perfect. With the carcass pretty much finished, I could get on to getting the drawer fronts ready and fitting them into place. With the drawer fronts all fitted, I could set up the router bit to form the profile on the front edge of the drawers. This is something that the client specifically wanted. Then I could get on to getting the drawer sides milled up. Like I said, this is Victorian ash, and it's 150 by 40, so rip it in half. And then I actually glued them back together for the large drawers, so I had quite tall pieces. And then I could machine it all back down to the right size for my drawer sides. The reason I can have such a tight tolerance is because that it is quarter sawn, and it's most likely not going to expand vertically, but in its width. So that's how you get a nice tight smooth running drawer. Now the drawers aren't being dovetailed. I'm going to rebate and dowel them together. So this is the rebate to take the side of the drawer. I'm also rebating the drawer side, so it's a double rebate. I could then set up a small dado blade to make a groove for the back of the drawer, and then route a groove for the base of the drawer, and also route the groove in the back of the drawer front to take the drawer base. And then I could get on with the fun task of gluing up however many drawers it is, which took a little bit of time. So I'm using some 5mm Rimu dowel that I've had laying about for years, never really used it. And also you might not be able to tell, I'm putting the dowels in on a slight angle. That adds a bit more mechanical strength to the join. After the glue up was dry, I could start fitting each drawer to its individual location on the carcass, and this also took quite a bit of time. Then it was on to clear coating the carcass. This is Minwax wipe-on poly, really nice stuff and an excellent finish. Actually, we could have got away with only 2 coats with this product, but ended up putting 3 on just because I feel like I had to. There are a couple of small wormholes that needed filling, so a bit of super glue and sawdust works really well for an instant fill. Then I could clean up all the drawer fronts and make sure they're looking pretty nice, and a finished sand of 320 I think it was. Then I could put a few domino slots in for the fixings for the top. And put my brand on and the date signature, and screw on the top, which is just a couple of planks I'd already glued together and thicknessed and sanded, and a nice profile to the front edge corner of the top. I found some pretty cheap spruce tongue and groove boards at my timber supplier, so I thought that would work just fine for the back of this unit, and it actually looks quite nice, I reckon. So the drawer bottoms are just pine boards glued together. I've sanded them off, and I'm using a large panel raising bit to raise the panels for the tongues to fit into the grooves of the drawers. So one of the last things to do is to put the drawer stops on. So I just use a marking gauge to find out where it needs to go. A little bit of super glue, and they are glued in place. The drawer stops right where it should. Last thing to do here is add the holes for the hardware and give the drawer fronts a final sand down and final clear coat. And I could fit the hardware, and that was it, finished. And that's it. Thanks for watching, everybody.